It started with a letter. The envelope was official-looking, stamped with a golden seal reading, Silver Pine Homeowner Association. Confused, I opened it and skimmed through the contents. My heart sank. The homeowner association claimed that my recently inherited land, a sprawling 10-acre property nestled on the edge of the Silver Pine community, fell under their jurisdiction. I wasn't part of any homeowner association. I made sure of that when my late father passed down the deed to me. The letter was filled with demands: immediate compliance with homeowner association regulations, payment of a membership fee I'd never agreed to, and an explanation of why I had failed to notify them about my intent to construct a home on the property. I crumpled the paper in my fist. What was this nonsense? That evening, I sat in my living room, poring over the property deed. There it was, in black and white. My land was not part of the Silver Pine Homeowners Association. The property existed before the Homeowner Association was even formed. My lawyer had confirmed it years ago, yet the letter claimed otherwise. Looks like they're testing the water, I muttered to myself. The next day I drove to the Homeowner Association's office, a shiny new building on the other side of the neighborhood. Inside, I was greeted by a receptionist with a saccharine smile and an air of disdain. "I'm here to speak with whoever sent this," I said, placing the letter on the desk. The receptionist gave it a quick glance. "Oh, that would be Karen Watson, our Homeowner Association president. She's in a meeting right now, but I'll let her know you're here." "I'll wait," I said firmly, taking a seat. After nearly an hour, Karen finally appeared. She was exactly the type of person I'd pictured: a sharp bob haircut, an expensive pantsuit, and a permanent scowl. Her smile, if you could call it that, was anything but welcoming. "Mr. Hanley, is it?" she asked, as if she didn't already know. "How can I help you?" I handed her the letter. "This says my property is part of the homeowner association." "It's not." Karen's eyes flicked to the paper, then back to me. "Ah, yes. There seems to be some confusion. Your land borders the homeowner association's managed community, and after a recent survey, we determined it's within our jurisdiction." "That's not true," I said, keeping my voice calm. "The deed explicitly states my property is independent of any homeowner association." Her smile tightened. "I'm afraid that's something we'll have to resolve legally. Until then, you're expected to comply with our guidelines. Failure to do so could result in penalties." Over the next week, things escalated quickly. Contractors appeared on the edge of my land, claiming they were authorized by the homeowner association to enhance community spaces. They began clearing trees near my southern boundary without notice. Furious, I confronted them, but they brushed me off, saying Karen had approved the work. Then came the fines. Homeowner association notices arrived almost daily, each one citing a different violation: failure to maintain the lawn, it was winter; improper fencing, the old wooden fence had been there for decades; and even unauthorized wildlife, because deer occasionally wandered onto my property. The breaking point came when I returned home one evening to find a surveyor on my property. He was marking the ground with stakes and spray paint. "Hey, what are you doing here?" I shouted, storming up to him. The man barely looked up. "Just following orders. Homeowner association's expanding a recreational area." "This is private property. You have no right to be here." Karen arrived moments later, smug as ever. "Mr. Hanley, we're working within our rights. If you have an issue, take it up with the homeowner association board." I stepped closer, fists clenched. "You're trespassing. Get off my land or I'll call the police." Karen's smile didn't waver. "Feel free to do so. I'll make sure our attorneys are prepared to countersue for obstruction." That night, I didn't sleep. I combed through every document I had, making copies of the deed, survey maps, and correspondence. The next morning, I contacted my lawyer and explained everything. "This isn't just about the homeowner association," he said. "It sounds like they're working with someone else. No homeowner association goes this far without a bigger motive." "Like what?" "Developers. There's big money in expanding communities. They probably want your land to build more homes or amenities." It made sense. Silver Pine was growing rapidly, and my 10 acres were prime real estate. But I wasn't going to let them take it. As I prepared to fight back, I noticed something odd the next day. A group of men in construction gear unloading equipment on the edge of my property. They weren't clearing trees this time. They were pouring concrete. The sight of wet concrete spreading across my property sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't just an encroachment. It was a declaration of war. I grabbed my phone and started taking pictures, documenting every detail. The trucks, the workers, even the smug supervisor who seemed to be overseeing the whole operation. I marched up to him, adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Who gave you permission to build here?" I demanded. The man barely glanced at me before turning his attention back to the concrete mixer. "Homeowner association contract. Talk to them." "This is private property," I shouted. "Get your equipment out of here now or I'll have you arrested for trespassing." That got his attention. He smirked, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. "Got permits and everything. Karen Watson signed off. If you've got a problem, take it up with her." I snatched the paper from his hand. It was an official-looking document, stamped with the Homeowner Association logo, authorizing the construction of a community basketball court. My blood boiled. This wasn't just about property lines anymore. They were acting as if they owned my land. Back in my house, I called the sheriff's department. When Deputy Ryan showed up, he listened patiently as I explained the situation and showed him the deed. He nodded but looked uneasy. "I get where you're coming from, Mr. Hanley," he said, "but this is a civil matter. You'll need to take it up in court." "Court?" I snapped. "By the time this gets to court, they'll have built half a park on my land." "I understand your frustration," he said, his tone measured. "But without a court order, there's not much we can do. I'll file a report, but I suggest you get a lawyer involved immediately." That night, my lawyer, Mark, came over to assess the situation. We pored over the homeowner association's permits and compared them to my deed. Something didn't add up. "This permit is bogus," Mark said, pointing to the document. "The homeowner association doesn't have the authority to grant construction rights on your property. It's a bluff." "So what do we do?" I asked. Mark's expression darkened. "We file a cease and desist order and start preparing for a lawsuit. But be ready for them to play dirty. These cases can get ugly." The next day, I hand-delivered the cease and desist order to Karen Watson's office. She greeted me with her trademark smirk. "Mr. Hanley," she said, folding her arms. "What a surprise." I slammed the order onto her desk. "This stops now. Your contractors are trespassing, and your permits are worthless." Karen didn't even flinch. She picked up the document, scanned it, and then looked at me with feigned concern. "Oh dear, it seems there's been a misunderstanding. I'll have my legal team review this." "Misunderstanding?" I barked. "You're stealing my land." She leaned in, her voice dripping with condescension. "Let me give you some advice, Mr. Hanley. Fighting the homeowner association is expensive. Why not just cooperate? We could even negotiate a generous buyout for your property." "Not a chance," I growled. "This is my land and I'm not selling." Karen's smile faltered for a split second before returning. "Suit yourself, but don't say I didn't warn you." That evening, I returned home to find something even more infuriating. A new homeowner association notice had been nailed to my front gate. It accused me of obstructing community development and levied a $5,000 fine. My hands shook as I ripped the paper down. They were trying to bury me in bureaucracy and fines, hoping I'd give up. But I wasn't about to back down. I spent the next several days gathering evidence. I recorded videos of the construction, documented every notice from the homeowner association, and even interviewed a few neighbors who had their own horror stories about Karen and her cronies. One elderly couple, the Millers, shared how the homeowner association had bullied them into selling their home at a fraction of its value by threatening endless fines and legal action. "She'll stop at nothing," Mrs. Miller warned. "You've got to be careful." By the end of the week, things took an even darker turn. My security cameras caught two men sneaking onto my property late at night. They vandalized my fence and spray-painted homeowner association property in bold letters across my barn. Furious, I called the sheriff again, but the deputy's response was the same. No court order, no action. The next morning, Mark called with an update. "I filed the lawsuit," he said. "We're going after them for trespassing, property damage, and fraud. But it's going to take time." "Time isn't on our side," I said. "They're escalating." Mark's tone grew serious. "Then we escalate too." Later that day, I reached out to a local news station. A reporter named Jenna was immediately interested in the story. "This sounds like a classic abuse of power," she said during our phone call. "If you're willing to go on record, we can bring this to light." "Do it," I said without hesitation. "They've been bullying people for too long." Within 48 hours, Jenna's crew was at my property, filming the construction site, the vandalized barn, and even the stack of bogus homeowner association notices. Her expose aired the following evening, painting a damning picture of the Silver Pine Homeowner Association and Karen Watson's authoritarian leadership. The backlash was immediate. My phone buzzed nonstop with calls and messages from neighbors, many of whom thanked me for standing up to the homeowner association. But the victory was short-lived. That night, as I reviewed my security footage, I noticed something alarming. A black SUV idling near my driveway for nearly an hour before speeding off. Karen wasn't done with me yet. The black SUV wasn't just a coincidence. By the third night of its appearance, I knew someone was watching me. Every time I approached the driveway with a flashlight, the vehicle would peel off into the darkness, its license plate obscured by mud. I didn't need to guess who was behind it. Karen. Her smug confidence during our last encounter, the vandalism, and now this. It all fit her pattern of intimidation. If she thought this would scare me into submission, she was dead wrong. The next morning, I met with Mark at his downtown office. He'd heard about the black SUV and agreed it was more than a coincidence. "This is harassment, plain and simple," he said, taking notes as I described the incidents. "We'll add it to the lawsuit, but for now you need to be careful. Karen's got a lot to lose if she's exposed. People like her don't play fair." "I'm not backing down," I said, my voice firm. "They're not taking my land." Mark nodded. "Good, but let's level the playing field. I'll file for an emergency injunction to halt construction. In the meantime, maybe consider upgrading your security." That afternoon, I installed extra cameras around the property. I wasn't taking any chances. If they tried something else, I'd have the evidence. Sure enough, the harassment escalated. The next day, I found my mailbox smashed to pieces, the fragments scattered across the driveway. A homeowner association notice lay among the debris, accusing me of creating a public eyesore by leaving construction materials on my property. I snapped a photo and forwarded it to Jenna, the reporter. "Looks like they're doubling down," she replied. "Mind if we run this in the follow-up piece?" "Go for it," I said. "The more people know about their tactics, the better." Jenna's second report hit even harder than the first. This time she highlighted the homeowner association's history of bullying and questionable practices, interviewing other residents who'd been strong-armed by Karen and her board. The Millers shared their story on camera, their voices trembling as they recounted how they'd been forced out of their home. Another family revealed how the homeowner association had drained their savings with endless fines over trivial violations. Karen's name became synonymous with corruption almost overnight. But instead of backing off, she struck back with a vengeance. 2 nights later, I woke to the sound of an engine revving outside. I grabbed my phone and bolted to the window. A pickup truck was idling near the barn, its headlights off. 2 figures jumped out and started spray painting something across the side of the building. I hit record on my phone and dialed the sheriff. "They're here again," I said, my voice hushed but urgent. 2 men vandalizing my barn." "Stay inside," the dispatcher said. "We're sending a unit." The figures finished their work and sped off just minutes before the deputies arrived. When I stepped outside with a flashlight, my stomach churned. They'd painted the words "Homeowner Association Rules" in giant dripping letters across the barn's weathered wood. The deputies took my statement and promised to investigate, but their tone made it clear they weren't optimistic. "Without clear evidence linking this to someone specific, it'll be tough to press charges," one of them said. "I've got security footage," I countered, showing them the recording on my phone. But the grainy video wasn't enough to identify the vandals. "We'll do what we can," the deputy said before driving off. The next day, I received a call from Jenna. "I just got word that Karen's filing a defamation lawsuit against you," she said. "She's claiming your accusations are baseless and damaging her reputation." I laughed bitterly. "Of course she is. What's her endgame here?" "She's trying to silence you," Jenna said. "It's a classic scare tactic. But if you're willing, we can expose this too. The public's on your side." "Do it," I said. "If she wants a fight, she's got one." Mark called later that evening with good news. The court had granted the emergency injunction, halting all construction on my property until the case was resolved. It was a small victory, but one that gave me a glimmer of hope. That night, as I reviewed my security footage again, I noticed something strange. The black SUV was back, parked further down the road this time. But this time, it wasn't alone. A second vehicle, a white van, was parked beside it. Through the grainy footage, I could make out the faint glow of laptops inside the van. They weren't just watching me, they were planning something. The presence of the van alongside the black SUV marked a turning point. Whatever Karen and her cronies were planning, it was bigger than petty harassment. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. The next morning, I met with Jenna and showed her the latest footage. A van and an SUV? This isn't just homeowner association intimidation anymore, she said, leaning closer to my laptop screen. This looks organized. What do you think they're doing? I asked. Could be anything, Jenna replied. But if they're using tech in that van, it's possible they're surveilling you, maybe gathering information for their lawsuit, or worse. Her words hung heavy in the air. I couldn't shake the feeling that this went beyond Karen's personal vendetta. Someone else was involved, someone with resources. Later that day, I called Mark to update him. He listened quietly before dropping a bombshell. I've been digging into the homeowner association's finances, he said. There's something you need to see. Mark sent over a file detailing recent transactions tied to the Silver Pine Homeowner Association. Among the usual expenses for landscaping and community maintenance, there were several large payments to a company called Apex Development Group. What's Apex Development? I asked. A real estate firm, Mark explained. They specialize in acquiring land for upscale housing projects. From what I can tell, they've got plans to expand the Silver Pine community, and your property is right in the middle of it. That evening, I did my own research on Apex Development. Their website boasted about transforming communities with luxury homes and recreational spaces, but the company's reputation was far from pristine. News articles detailed lawsuits, accusations of underhanded tactics, and partnerships with homeowner associations to pressure homeowners into selling. It all made sense now. Karen wasn't just acting on her own. Apex Development was pulling the strings, using the homeowner association as their enforcer. The next day, I drove to the county clerk's office to pull public records on Apex dealings in the area. As I sifted through the files, I found something chilling: a preliminary zoning request filed by Apex. It included plans to redevelop several acres of land, including my property, into a gated community with luxury homes, a golf course, and a clubhouse. They'd already mapped out their vision for my land. I wasn't even a factor in their equation. I confronted Karen that same afternoon. Bursting into the homeowner association's office, I slammed the zoning documents onto her desk. Care to explain this? I demanded. Karen didn't even flinch. Oh, you've been busy, Mr. Hanley, she said with a sly smile. It's not what you think. Not what I think? I barked. You've partnered with Apex to steal my land. Her smile faded. Watch your tone. You're making serious accusations without proof. I have plenty of proof, I shot back. Your financial records, the zoning plans, everything. You're not getting away with this. Karen's eyes narrowed. You're out of your depth, Mr. Hanley. This isn't just about you. It's about progress. Progress? I spat. Destroying my property for your profit isn't progress. Before I could say more, two men in suits stepped into the office. They carried an air of authority, and one of them handed Karen a folder. Mr. Hanley, Karen said, her voice suddenly calm. Meet Mr. Grayson and Mr. Lanning. They're representatives from Apex Development. Perhaps they can explain things better. Grayson stepped forward, extending a hand I refused to shake. Mr. Hanley, he began, we understand your concerns, but this project is an opportunity for the entire community. We're prepared to make you a generous offer for your property. Not interested, I said flatly. Think it over, Grayson replied, unfazed. We're offering far above market value. You could walk away from all this with a substantial profit. I'm not selling, Anton, I repeated. Now get off my land. Grayson's smile didn't reach his eyes. That's unfortunate, but I'm sure you'll reconsider. That night, the intimidation escalated. My cameras caught the same SUV and van returning, but this time they parked closer. Through the grainy footage, I saw figures prowling near my barn. When I checked the barn the next morning, I found the padlock broken and the inside ransacked. Tools were missing, and my tractor's fuel line had been cut. Mark urged me to report it, but the sheriff's department remained frustratingly passive. Without solid evidence, there's not much we can do, the deputy said. File an insurance claim for the damages. Insurance won't stop them, I snapped. The deputy sighed. I get it, Mr. Hanley, but this isn't just a local issue. These people play hardball. Be careful. As I repaired the damage, I realized I couldn't fight this battle alone. If Apex and the homeowner association wanted a war, I needed reinforcements. By now it was clear that Apex and the homeowner association weren't just nuisances. They were a well-oiled machine, armed with money, connections, and no shortage of intimidation tactics. But if they thought they could steamroll me, they were sorely mistaken. After repairing the damage to my barn, I made a decision. It was time to fight fire with fire. The first step was gathering allies. Over the past few weeks, Jenna's exposés had sparked outrage among the residents of Silver Pine. Many neighbors who had previously stayed quiet about the homeowner association's abuses were now speaking up. I began reaching out to them, one by one. Mrs. Miller was the first to join. "We've been waiting for someone like you to stand up to them," she said, her voice shaky but determined. "They took our home, but they won't take yours." Soon others followed. A young couple who had been fined into near bankruptcy for painting their fence the wrong shade of white. A retired veteran whose service dog had been banned by the homeowner association for being too large. Even the Smiths, who had once been Karen's staunchest supporters, admitted they were fed up with her tyranny. Our first meeting took place in my living room. A dozen people crammed onto couches and folding chairs, their faces a mix of anger and hope. "We've all suffered because of the homeowner association," I began. "But this isn't just about me. It's about standing up to their corruption and taking back what's ours." Jenna was there too, recording the meeting for her next piece. Mark laid out our strategy, building a class action lawsuit against the homeowner association and Apex Development, while also leveraging public pressure to expose their illegal activities. "It won't be easy," Mark warned. "They have deep pockets and powerful friends, but with enough evidence and a united front, we can take them down." The next step was gathering proof. With the neighbors' help, I began collecting every scrap of documentation we could find. Fines, notices, photographs, and even emails from Karen that hinted at shady dealings. One neighbor, a tech-savvy teenager named Ethan, managed to hack into the homeowner association's public Wi-Fi network and unearthed a trove of incriminating files. Among them was a draft agreement between Karen and Apex Development. It detailed their plans to seize several properties, including mine, under the guise of community improvement. The payout for Karen's cooperation was a six-figure sum, disguised as a consulting fee. As we pieced together the evidence, Apex's tactics grew more aggressive. Contractors returned to my property, this time with armed security guards. When I confronted them, the guards threatened to escort me off my own land. "You don't belong here," one of them sneered, his hand resting on his holstered weapon. I stood my ground. "This is my property. You're trespassing." They didn't budge until I called the sheriff, who reluctantly intervened. But even then, the guards left with smug grins, knowing the law was on their side. For now. Jenna's third expose aired that week, and it hit harder than ever. She revealed the leaked agreement between Karen and Apex, complete with damning quotes from the document. The story went viral, drawing national attention. News outlets across the country picked up the story, and social media exploded with outrage. "Homeowner Association tyrant partners with developers to steal land," one headline read. "Homeowners fight back against corruption," said another. Karen responded with a public statement, claiming the documents were doctored and accusing me of orchestrating a smear campaign. But the damage was done. Public opinion had turned against her, and even some members of the Homeowner Association board began distancing themselves from her. The tipping point came during a heated Homeowner Association meeting that I attended with several neighbors. The room was packed, tensions palpable, as Karen tried to maintain control. "These allegations are baseless," she declared, her voice cracking under the pressure. "Everything we do is for the benefit of the community." I stood up, holding the leaked agreement in my hand. "Is that why you're selling our land to Apex for a personal profit?" The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Karen's face turned pale. "This meeting is adjourned," she shouted, slamming her gavel. But it was too late. The crowd wasn't going anywhere. That night, I received a phone call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was calm, almost friendly. "Mr. Hanley," the man said, "you're making powerful enemies." "Who is this?" I demanded. "Let's just say I represent interests that don't appreciate your meddling. If you know what's good for you, you'll drop this fight." "Not a chance," I said, my grip tightening on the phone. The voice chuckled. "Suit yourself, but don't say we didn't warn you." The next day, I discovered a dead animal, an opossum stuffed into my mailbox. It was a message, loud and clear, but instead of fear, it ignited a fire inside me. They wanted me to back down. I wasn't going anywhere. The battle had only just begun. The message in the mailbox was a crude but clear attempt at intimidation. It only strengthened my resolve. If Karen and Apex thought fear would stop me, they underestimated how far I was willing to go to protect my land. The day after the mailbox incident, I called another meeting with my allies. This time, we convened in the Miller's garage, a safer location since my property was clearly under surveillance. "They're escalating," I began, holding up a photo of the vandalized barn and the dead animal. "This isn't just about harassment anymore. It's about sending a message. But they're not the only ones who can send messages." Jenna nodded. "The more public this gets, the harder it'll be for them to keep up these tactics. People need to see what they're doing." "I agree," said Mark. "But we also need to hit them where it hurts. Their pockets. Apex and Karen are motivated by profit. If we disrupt their plans, they'll start to fold." Our strategy took shape quickly. While Jenna prepared another hard-hitting expose, the rest of us worked to mobilize the broader community. We started a petition to dissolve the Homeowner Association Board and began canvassing door to door, sharing our stories and gathering signatures. Many residents were hesitant at first, fearful of retaliation, but the growing evidence of corruption won them over. By the end of the week, we had hundreds of signatures and a growing coalition of neighbors ready to stand up against the Homeowner Association. The next major breakthrough came from Ethan, our tech-savvy teenager. Late one night, he called me, his voice crackling with excitement. "Mr. Hanley, I found something big," he said. "There's a private server Apex uses to store their internal communications. It wasn't easy, but I got in." "What did you find?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Emails," he replied. "Lots of them. They show Karen and Apex planning everything. The land grab, the fake fines, even the intimidation tactics. They talk about you by name, Mr. Hanley." Ethan sent me the files, and as I read through them, my anger boiled over. The emails detailed Apex's plans to force me off my land by any means necessary, including fabricated lawsuits and physical threats. Karen's name appeared repeatedly, approving every step of their scheme. The next morning, I shared the emails with Mark and Jenna. Both were stunned by the sheer brazenness of the correspondence. "This is the smoking gun," Mark said. "We can take this straight to court." "And to the public," Jenna added. "This will destroy any credibility Karen and Apex have left." The story broke that evening. Jenna's report was explosive, featuring leaked emails, testimonials from residents, and footage of the vandalism on my property. It painted a damning picture of a corrupt homeowner association and a predatory developer colluding to exploit homeowners. The backlash was immediate and fierce. Social media erupted with outrage, and news outlets across the country picked up the story. Within hours, Karen's name was trending for all the wrong reasons. Karen released a statement, predictably denying everything and claiming the emails were fabricated. But the weight of the evidence was overwhelming, and even her staunchest allies began to distance themselves. Apex Development went silent, their usual PR channels suspiciously quiet. With public opinion firmly on our side, we decided to take the fight directly to Apex. A group of us organized a peaceful protest outside their regional office. Armed with signs, cameras, and media attention, we demanded accountability and an end to their predatory practices. The protest drew a crowd far larger than we'd anticipated. Local activists, journalists, and even officials showed up to support us. The pressure on Apex was mounting, and it was clear they were starting to crack. But Karen wasn't done yet. That night, I received another call from an unknown number. This time, the voice on the other end wasn't calm. It was seething. "You've made a big mistake, Hanley," the man snarled. "You think you can take us down with some emails and a few protests? You have no idea who you're dealing with." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," I shot back, "and I'm not afraid of you." The line went dead, but the threat lingered. The next morning, I woke to find my driveway blocked by a row of concrete barriers. A note taped to one of them read, "Stay out. This is homeowner association property now." Furious, I called Mark and the sheriff. While the deputies removed the barriers, Mark assured me this would only strengthen our case. "They're desperate," he said, "and desperate people make mistakes." As the legal battle intensified, so did the community support. More residents came forward with their own stories of harassment and fraud, adding fuel to our fight. Even the local government began to take notice, launching an investigation into the homeowner association's practices and Apex's dealings. But the more we uncovered, the more dangerous things became. It was clear Karen and Apex were willing to go to any lengths to protect their empire. And the closer we got to the truth, the higher the stakes became. The concrete barriers in my driveway were the boldest move yet. Karen and Apex weren't just trying to intimidate me anymore. They were actively obstructing my ability to live on my own property. But if they thought this would break me, they couldn't have been more wrong. The morning after the barriers appeared, I held a press conference right there in my driveway. Jenna and her crew were there, along with half a dozen other reporters who'd caught wind of the story. With the barricades behind me, I laid everything bare. The vandalism, the emails, the threats, and now this blatant act of aggression. This isn't just about one homeowner, I said, addressing the cameras. It's about standing up to corruption, greed, and the abuse of power. Karen Watson and Apex Development think they can bully us into submission, but they've underestimated the strength of this community. The crowd cheered, and I could see Karen's house in the distance, her curtains twitching. She was watching. By that evening, the story had spread like wildfire. National outlets picked it up, and social media was ablaze with hashtags like Stand with Adam and Homeowner Association Corruption. The pressure was mounting, and I knew it was only a matter of time before Karen or Apex made their next move. It didn't take long. 2 nights later, I was woken by the sound of shattering glass. Grabbing a flashlight and a bat, I crept downstairs to find a brick lying in the middle of my living room. Attached to it was a note scrawled in red ink. "This isn't over." I called the sheriff immediately, but by the time deputies arrived, the culprits were long gone. They took the brick and the note as evidence, but their expressions told me not to expect much. "We'll keep an eye on things," one of them said, clearly trying to sound reassuring, "but you might want to consider staying somewhere else for a while." "This is my home," I replied. "I'm not going anywhere." The next day, Mark called with news that sent a chill down my spine. Karen and Apex had filed a countersuit against me, accusing me of defamation and unlawful interference with community development. The amount they were seeking was astronomical, enough to bankrupt me 10 times over. "It's a scare tactic," Mark assured me. "They know they can't win, but they're hoping to drain you financially." "Let them try," I said. "I'm not backing down." Meanwhile, Ethan continued digging through Apex files. What he found next blew the case wide open. A series of internal memos detailing payments to local officials, including building inspectors, zoning commissioners, and even members of law enforcement. It was a web of bribery and corruption that explained why Apex and Karen had been able to operate with such impunity. One memo in particular caught my attention. It referenced a Phase 2 plan, which included not just my property, but several others in the area. They weren't just trying to take my land. They were aiming to transform the entire community into a luxury development, no matter who got hurt in the process. Armed with this new evidence, Mark filed an emergency motion to dismiss the countersuit and requested a criminal investigation into Apex and the homeowner association. The motion was granted, and within days, investigators were combing through Apex's records and subpoenaing homeowner association board members. Karen's once smug demeanor began to crack. She avoided public appearances and stopped responding to reporters. Rumors swirled that she was preparing to resign, but I wasn't ready to celebrate just yet. Apex was still in the game, and their resources dwarfed mine. The next confrontation came at a public hearing, where Apex representatives were set to present their zoning proposal to the county commission. I showed up with Mark, Jenna, and dozens of neighbors, all armed with signs, documents, and sheer determination. Grayson, the slick Apex executive I'd met before, took the podium with his rehearsed charm. "This project will bring tremendous value to the community," he began, his tone smooth and confident. "We've worked closely with the homeowner association to ensure it aligns with residents' interests." I stood up. "Whose interests?" I interrupted, holding up a copy of the leaked emails. "Because these documents suggest otherwise." The room erupted in murmurs as I handed copies to the commissioners. Grayson's composure faltered, and Karen, seated in the back, looked like she wanted to sink into the floor. Mark stepped forward, presenting the evidence of bribery and corruption. "This isn't a development project," he said. "It's a hostile takeover, fueled by greed and executed through illegal means. We demand that this proposal be rejected and a full investigation launched." The commissioners were visibly shaken. By the end of the hearing, they had voted unanimously to deny Apex proposal and refer the matter to state authorities. That night, our victory felt bittersweet. While we had dealt a major blow to Apex and Karen, I knew the fight wasn't over. They were wounded but not defeated, and desperate people are the most dangerous. As I locked up for the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was coming. My cameras captured nothing unusual, and the roads around my property were quiet. But the silence felt ominous, like the calm before a storm. The morning after the public hearing felt almost tranquil. For the first time in weeks, my phone wasn't buzzing with angry calls, threats, or updates from Mark. But the stillness didn't last long. By mid-afternoon, I heard the familiar growl of engines and saw a convoy of trucks pulling onto the edge of my property. This time, they weren't construction crews. They were private security contractors dressed in black uniforms and armed with more than just flashlights. They set up a perimeter near the disputed boundary, erecting temporary fencing and planting signs that read, "Property under Homeowner Association Authority, no trespassing." Furious, I called the sheriff's office, but the response was as predictable as it was infuriating. "They're operating within a legal gray area," the deputy said over the phone. "Without a court order, we can't force them to leave." "So you're just going to let armed men camp out on my property?" I snapped. The deputy sighed. "I'll file a report, but there's not much else we can do right now." Frustrated but not surprised, I hung up and immediately called Mark. "They're doubling down," I told him. "Private security, fences, the works." "It's a bluff, Wes," Mark replied. "They're trying to intimidate you into backing off before the investigation gains traction." "It's working on some of my neighbors," I admitted. "They're scared." "Then we need to act fast," he said. "I'll petition for an emergency injunction to have the security removed. In the meantime, keep documenting everything." By nightfall, the private security team was patrolling the perimeter with flashlights and radios. My cameras caught them cutting down trees and trampling through the underbrush, further damaging my land. The sight was infuriating, but I knew better than to confront them directly. Instead, I spent the night reviewing the footage and compiling it for Mark. Just before midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from Jenna. "Big lead, call me ASAP." Jenna's lead turned out to be a bombshell. A whistleblower from Apex Development had come forward, offering to share inside information in exchange for anonymity. The whistleblower, a mid-level project manager, provided Jenna with documents and recordings that confirmed everything we suspected. Apex and the Homeowner Association had orchestrated a massive scheme to seize properties, grease palms, and silence dissenters. The recordings were damning. In one, Karen was heard bragging about how nobody's going to stop progress and laughing about how Hanley will fold like the rest of them. Another recording captured an Apex executive discussing plans to escalate pressure on homeowners through legal and extra-legal means. The next morning, Jenna aired the whistleblower's story. The recordings played on every major network, turning Karen and Apex into public enemies overnight. The backlash was immediate. Protesters gathered outside the Homeowner Association office and Apex's headquarters, demanding accountability. Social media was ablaze with calls for Karen's resignation and a full-scale investigation into Apex. For the first time, I felt like we were truly winning. But Karen wasn't done yet. That evening, I received a letter hand-delivered by one of her cronies. It was a cease and desist order, accusing me of inciting violence against the Homeowner Association and threatening to sue me for defamation if I didn't publicly retract my statements. I laughed out loud as I read it. The audacity was almost impressive. I forwarded the letter to Mark. His response was simple. "Ignore it. This is desperation." Desperation or not, Karen and Apex were still dangerous. 2 nights later, my cameras caught a group of masked figures sneaking onto my property. They slashed the tires on my truck, smashed the barn windows, and left graffiti on my fence. "You lose." This time, the sheriff took the incident more seriously. Deputies patrolled the area for the next few days, and Mark used the footage to bolster our case. Still, the attack was a stark reminder that Karen and Apex wouldn't go down without a fight. As the investigation into Apex gained momentum, more whistleblowers came forward. Former Homeowner Association board members admitted they had been coerced or bribed into supporting Karen's agenda. Local officials began to distance themselves from Apex, and rumors swirled that state prosecutors were preparing to file criminal charges. Then the breakthrough we'd been waiting for arrived. A federal investigator contacted Mark, requesting access to all the evidence we'd gathered. The Apex scheme had caught the attention of higher authorities, and they were ready to step in. The pressure finally cracked Karen. A week later, she resigned as Homeowner Association president, citing personal reasons. Her departure sent shockwaves through the community, and many of her closest allies followed suit. Apex, meanwhile, issued a statement claiming they had acted in good faith and were committed to resolving the matter amicably. It was a weak attempt to save face, and nobody bought it. But even as Karen and Apex began to crumble, I knew the fight wasn't over. The damage they had done to me and my neighbors couldn't be undone overnight. And there was still one nagging question that kept me up at night. Who else had been complicit in their scheme? How deep did the corruption go? Karen's resignation was a victory, but it didn't feel final. Something about the speed of her departure and Apex's tepid response suggested they were scrambling to hide something deeper. My suspicions were confirmed when I received a tip from an unlikely source. A former homeowner association board member who had anonymously reached out to Jenna. The former board member, who we'll call Diane, claimed that Apex wasn't just working with the homeowner association, they had infiltrated local government. According to her, Apex had planted allies in key positions, including the Zoning Commission and the Sheriff's Department. These individuals had been instrumental in pushing through Apex's agenda and silencing dissent. They've been building this for years, Diane explained during a late-night call. Karen was just the face. The real power is higher up. Her claim sent chills down my spine. If Apex's reach extended into government institutions, our fight was far from over. The next morning, I shared Diane's information with Mark and Jenna. Mark was skeptical at first, but agreed to investigate further. Jenna, meanwhile, began connecting the dots between Apex's projects and suspicious zoning decisions in other communities. The pattern was clear. Apex would target independent properties, use homeowner associations as proxies to pressure owners, and leverage corrupt officials to ensure their plans went unchallenged. It wasn't just my fight anymore. This was systemic. The investigation gained traction quickly. Jenna's latest expose detailed Apex's manipulation of local government, complete with testimonies from whistleblowers and evidence of questionable campaign contributions to public officials. The story hit harder than ever, sparking outrage and calls for a federal inquiry. But with the spotlight on Apex, the backlash against me escalated. Anonymous threats poured in. My neighbors reported unmarked vehicles idling near their homes, and another round of vandalism targeted my property. This time, the barn was set on fire. I woke to the smell of smoke. By the time I ran outside, the fire had consumed half the structure. The flames danced in the night, illuminating the words scrawled on the barn's exterior before it collapsed. Final warning. The fire department managed to contain the blaze before it spread, but the barn was a total loss. The next morning, Mark filed an emergency injunction demanding increased law enforcement presence, citing the escalating violence. The sheriff's department finally relented, assigning a patrol car to monitor the property. It was too little, too late. 2 days later, Diane contacted me again, this time with an urgent warning. "They know," she said, her voice trembling. "They know I talked to you. I'm leaving town. Be careful." Her words confirmed what I'd feared. Apex was still watching, and they weren't done with me yet. Meanwhile, Mark's team uncovered another critical piece of the puzzle. A bank account tied to Apex showed large payments to a consulting firm, which turned out to be a shell company. Digging deeper, they traced the funds to several officials involved in approving Apex's projects, including members of the Zoning Commission and a high-ranking deputy in the sheriff's office. Mark's voice was grim when he called me. "This isn't just bribery, it's racketeering. If we can prove this in court, Apex and their allies could face serious criminal charges." The breakthrough gave me hope, but it also painted a target on my back. That evening, my cameras caught 2 men in hoodies tampering with the security system outside my house. I called the patrol car station nearby, and the deputies apprehended the men before they could escape. To my surprise, one of them was a contractor who had worked on the fencing project Apex had started on my property. The other was a known associate of Karen's. They refused to talk, but their arrest sent a clear message. Apex's operatives were getting desperate. The next day, Jenna received another tip from a different whistleblower. This time, it was an Apex accountant who provided detailed financial records. The documents outlined millions of dollars in illicit transactions, including payments to suppress lawsuits, fund smear campaigns, and pay off security contractors. One entry caught my eye, a 6-figure sum labeled Incident Containment Hanley. Apex had budgeted for their campaign against me specifically. Armed with the new evidence, Mark and Jenna coordinated with federal investigators. Apex's scheme was unraveling, and the pressure was mounting. Karen, now in hiding, was subpoenaed to testify, but refused to cooperate. Meanwhile, Apex's CEO issued a statement denying any wrongdoing and blaming rogue employees for the controversy. It was a blatant lie, and everyone knew it. As the federal case gained momentum, the mood in Silver Pine shifted. Neighbors who had once been too afraid to speak out began sharing their own stories, strengthening our case against the Homeowner Association and Apex. The community, once fractured by fear, was uniting against a common enemy. But as we celebrated small victories, I couldn't shake the feeling that Apex had one last card to play. They had too much to lose to walk away quietly. The final chapter of the battle began with a subpoena. Apex's CEO, Karen Watson, and several implicated officials were ordered to appear in federal court. The evidence Jenna and Mark had gathered was ironclad. Financial records, whistleblower testimonies, and surveillance footage painted a damning picture of collusion, bribery, and intimidation. But as we prepared for the trial, Apex made their last desperate move. It started with a coordinated smear campaign. Articles began appearing online, accusing me of fabricating evidence and painting me as an unstable conspiracy theorist. Trolls flooded my social media accounts, and even some neighbors started to question whether the fight was worth the trouble. "Stay strong," Jenna said during one of our late-night strategy calls. "This is exactly what they want." Then came the legal maneuvering. Apex's high-powered attorneys filed motion after motion, trying to dismiss the case, delay the trial, and discredit the whistleblowers. But Mark was relentless, countering every move with precision. By the time the trial date arrived, Apex had exhausted their tricks and were backed into a corner. The courtroom was packed on the first day of the trial. Journalists, community members, and even former Apex employees filled the benches. Karen sat stone-faced at the defense table, her once commanding presence reduced to a shadow of itself. The prosecution opened with the most damning evidence, a recording of Karen approving the harassment tactics used against me and other homeowners. Her voice echoed through the courtroom, cold and calculating. "If we push hard enough, they'll fold. Nobody wants to fight a losing battle." I glanced at Karen as the recording played. For the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. Over the next several days, the prosecution dismantled Apex defense piece by piece. Whistleblowers testified about the inner workings of the scheme, describing how Apex used homeowner associations to target vulnerable homeowners and exploit their properties for profit. Diane's testimony was particularly powerful. She described the pressure she'd faced to comply with Karen's directives and the guilt she felt for staying silent. "I knew it was wrong," she said, her voice trembling, "but they made it clear what would happen if I didn't fall in line." The turning point came when the whistleblower accountant took the stand. He presented detailed financial records that exposed the full scope of Apex's corruption, including payments to local officials and security contractors. One particularly damning document outlined a contingency plan labeled Operation Silence, which detailed measures to intimidate homeowners and suppress media coverage. "This wasn't just about profit," the accountant said. "It was about control. They wanted to own everything: land, people, even the narrative." In the closing arguments, Mark delivered a powerful statement that resonated with everyone in the courtroom. "This case is about more than one man's fight to protect his property. It's about standing up to greed, corruption, and the abuse of power. Apex and their allies thought they could silence us, but today, we show them that justice still matters." The jury deliberated for 2 days before returning with a verdict: guilty on all counts. Apex was fined millions. Their executives faced prison time, and the homeowner association was dissolved by court order. Karen was sentenced to 5 years for her role in the scheme, her downfall serving as a warning to others who would exploit their power. The victory was bittersweet. While we had won the battle, the scars of the fight remained. My barn was gone, my land was damaged, and some neighbors had moved away, unable to recover from the trauma. But the community that stayed was stronger than ever, united by the shared experience of standing up to a common enemy. In the months that followed, the state implemented new laws to regulate homeowner associations and prevent abuses like those perpetrated by Karen and Apex. Jenna's series of exposés won awards, and she used the platform to continue advocating for homeowners' rights. Mark became a sought-after attorney, his reputation cemented by the case. As for me, I rebuilt, literally and figuratively. The barn was replaced, the fences repaired, and the land returned to its former glory. I still get the occasional look of admiration from neighbors or a thank you note from someone I helped inspire. But for the most part, life has returned to a quiet normalcy. One evening, months after the trial, I found a letter in my mailbox. It was unsigned, but the message was clear. Thank you for standing up when we couldn't. You reminded us what it means to fight for what's right. I smiled as I folded the letter and tucked it away. The fight had been long and grueling, but it was worth it. Because in the end, justice had prevailed.